we think that instead of being Dharma warriors or beneficial in some way towards sentient beings, actively beneficial, or bodhisattvas that really take an active posture, instead we fall into our deeply ingrained habitual tendencies. Now the children have an advantage, I think, in that they are young enough to be able to play a game such as putting on a costume that causes them to be mindful, to think of what it is that they are doing and how they can best do it, how they can best accomplish it. But maybe it's not so different when you see monks and nuns. They have on a costume, literally, in that their dress is not the average American contemporary dress, I don't think, is it? You've never seen anyone, like they don't sell that in Bloomies, do they? No. So it's not your average contemporary dress. So they're dressing that way to signify their inner commitment, their commitment as renunciate. And so the dress becomes something of a costume in the same way that the children are wearing costume that reminds them of their hopes, reminds them of their promises, of their ideals, their commitments. And the clothing becomes for them a safety factor, in a sense, a protector. Actually, when one becomes a monk or a nun and one takes the yellow robes, which are the robes that go over the robes that they're having now and only worn during special times, one actually does prostrations to the robes upon arising in the morning. Now, wouldn't you think that was odd? Wouldn't you think that the thing to be venerated would be the person who is wearing the robes? In a sense, they should be venerated because they are the Sangha and they will live their lives helping to propagate the teachings, helping to practice the teachings, and therefore keeping the teachings alive in a very pure sense. Yet, the robe is what causes them to remain mindful, and in fact the robe is considered to be the garment of the Buddha. It reminds us of the Vinaya, it reminds us of our renunciation. It causes us to remain fixed, appropriately so, within our practice. They are still, actually, ordinary sentient beings. They are living extraordinary lives, but they are ordinary sentient beings with the same habitual tendencies that other sentient beings have. Same problems, same challenges, same difficulties, am I right? When you put on the robes, that all desire go away? You wish, right? When you put on the robes that you become a perfect renunciate? No? Did all discursive thought disappear? No? All hatred? All greed? All ignorance? Not a chance. And so we are still all ordinary sentient beings, but we take refuge in the robes because they are a way for us to remain mindful. The necessity for that comes about because of our deeply ingrained habitual tendencies. Within the Dharma path, there are many different ways to pacify those deeply ingrained habitual tendencies, but first we should understand exactly how those tendencies come about. Those tendencies come about because since time out of mind, that is unrecognizable time, unaccountable time, we have had the idea, we have thought of ourselves, we have had the concept of self-nature as being very solid and inherently real. We have literally existed within the mind or the continuum of the experience of duality, always distinguishing between self and other. Self-nature becomes meaningful only in that it is separate from other. Other becomes meaningful only in that it is separate from self-nature. And while we are meditating on a fixed way, which we are continuously, on the ego, self, or the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, this mind of division or mind of duality or continuum of duality continues. Yet as we come to study the Buddha's teachings, we come to understand that that initial assumption is incorrect. That in fact, if one examines, one cannot find the basis for the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. That in fact, the primordial wisdom nature, which is clear, undefiled, unlimited, luminous, free of all conceptualization, free of all ideation, this pure, uncontrived, non-distinct, non-specific luminosity is our true nature. It is our primordial wisdom nature. Not ego. That is a false assumption. But we have had that false assumption and held to it and clung to it for so long, since time out of mind, that just because we learn that our true nature is the Buddha nature, just because we learn that our true nature is the primordial wisdom state, doesn't mean that we're going to drop that discursive thought, that we're going to drop all conceptualization, that we're going to drop all such consideration, and we're going to realize, awaken to the innately wakeful state, that we're going to see the uncontrived, luminous view and forget the ego. We wish that that could happen. We wish that we could just hear the truth and be freed. But unfortunately, that is not the case. We will not be able to let go the idea, the fixation on the solidity of self-nature. The reason for that being, in a sense, twofold. The first reason is that it becomes a deeply habitual tendency. And we can see that habitual tendency occurs even in our ordinary lives. We can see that if we learn to brush our teeth in a certain way, it's very hard to break the habit and brush our teeth in a different way. And let's see, what's another good example of that? Oh, let's say maybe women can identify with this better than men, unless men are about the same age as I am. Perhaps at some point you've had long hair. And if you've had long hair and then cut it short, you find that for a period of time, after cutting your hair, you still do like this, you know, thinking that it's there, and yet the hair is not there. So you have the habitual tendency of a certain self-image, a certain idea that remains habitual. Now, if you think that perhaps you might have had long hair for a few years, and then you cut it, and then for some period of time, you still toss your hair about, thinking that it's there, and your body still reacts strangely, becoming overly sensitive to the coldness on the back of your head, or the difference in temperature of your scalp and head itself. If that happens for some time, where the ghost of your hair feels like it's still with you, or in the tragic case of someone having a limb removed, in which the phantom limb remains for quite some time. The feeling of a limb and even pain in the limb that has been removed, and that's medically documented, remains for some time. Then how much more profound must be the habitual tendencies that we have brought with us since the original idea of self-nature? How much more profound must be the habitual tendency of a habit that has begun in some time in the past that we cannot calculate or even conceive of in any way. That time has been so long. According to the Buddha, we have lived not 100, not 200, not 10, but uncountable lifetimes, uncountable experiences, believing in self-nature as being inherently real. So we have this deeply ingrained habitual tendency that is more like a compulsion than it is like a habit. A habit? Maybe you can stop biting your nails. Maybe you can splint your elbows and walk around like this, and eventually you'll learn not to bite your nails. Maybe you can have some of that fancy stuff put on your nails like I do to keep from biting your nails. Maybe you can put hot pepper on them. You can do something. You can try to break a habit, but how can you break a habit that has existed since time out of mind? How can you do that? It's more like a compulsion. It's more like the entire experience of continuum, the entire mind stream takes on a certain compulsive, almost elastic quality that you can maybe remove yourself from it for a time. For instance, if one were to meditate, and even if one were to achieve some limited small result, which is really all we achieve at first, of spaciousness, eventually, you know for yourself, the mind will kick back in. That experience of self will kick back in. Even if you manage to space out for a minute, that self-nature will greet you at the door saying, hello, I'm still here. And you will not forget, because the first thought you will have is, I just spaced out. Wow. Or, I just had an experience. And it's like that. It never stops. You can't seem to get rid of it. You can't turn that little booger off. That habitual tendency is so strong. It's a compulsion. And it's funny, there are many teachings given that sound like this. The more you tell the monkey, meaning the ego, to shut up, the louder and more obnoxious it becomes. And that's true. That's actually quite true, because this compulsion that we have is not only just a kind of a almost stretchy, elastic, habitual tendency, but it has a lot of concepts and elaborations and artificial constructions built all around it. Because the problem with self-nature is that it only exists as long as you continue it. Therefore, once you really believe that you have it, once you consider that you have self-nature, you must continue it. And you must develop all of these fail-safe methods to continue it. Because if you don't continue it, the only other experience you think you're going to have is chaos, death. It is not understood that the alternative experience to self-nature is the experience of natural luminosity. So we have a compulsion to continue that experience. And even if we talk ourselves out of it, it's like dealing with a compulsive neurosis. You can't talk an alcoholic out of drinking. Only when they become sober enough for reasoning, only when they become sober enough to really understand something of the process and something of the problem, can a real cure be effected. We are obsessed with the idea of self-nature. And so we have to go through something. Something has to happen to enable us, empower us, to be able to break this cycle. It's very difficult for us to understand how to break the cycle. We must go through some kind of extraordinary process. Well, I think about the Ngundro teachings that you will receive this afternoon. Ngundro is actually preliminary practice. It isn't considered to be the very meat of Vajrayana, although in the Vajrayana path there are many lamas who actually practice Ngundro again and again and again, who achieve extraordinary results simply through the practicing of Ngundro again and again and again. That means completing all of the 5 requirements and then going over and repeating the 5 requirements again. I think of the stories I've heard of very highly realized lamas, more realized than we can possibly imagine, who practiced the completion of Ngundro 20 some odd times. I think His Holiness Dudjom Rinpoche, before his passing, practiced Ngundro 23, 21, I can't remember, 20 some odd times. That's an enormous amount of practice. It's so difficult for us to understand. But the feeling is that if we don't delude ourselves, we must understand that this strong compulsion and habitual tendency is so profound that it must be broken in some extraordinary way. If we have spent time inconceivable shoring up, making firm our belief in self-nature and acting accordingly with selfishness, with ignorance of the primordial wisdom state, and with hatred toward others. If we have acted in that way habitually and repeatedly again and again since time out of mind, how much antidote is required then? How much antidote is required? A lot. It has to be a lot. It's only reasonable to assume that it must be a lot. Only those of us that are extremely deluded think that we're going to simply say, I think I'll turn my life around and be spiritual, and I think I'll start now, so tomorrow will be better. How many times have we done that? How many times have we thought, yeah, I'm going to get spiritual now. Yeah, this is it. I'm really changing my life around. And so we walk around trying to act spiritual, you know, or maybe we try to think spiritual, or try to read what spiritual is and then copy that. We mimic spiritual. Try to be good, try to be holy looking, try to dress differently, try to act differently. And then at that point, we become extremely dissatisfied with the result. We must become dissatisfied with the result because there is no result. Perhaps there is some value in the decision. There must be some value in the decision. Just to want to become closer to enlightenment is a good thing. But to think that we're going to achieve results just by adapting a certain demeanor is a joke. I mean, it's a laughable joke. And we are the laughable jokers when we do that. It's really like an alcoholic who doesn't stop drinking at all, doesn't go through any program to help himself detox or purify, doesn't do anything about changing his behavioristic tendencies, but says, today, I'm not an alcoholic. Bingo. And we're still drinking. So we delude ourselves. It's really like that. It's just like that. And in our drunkenness, we can believe anything. The other problem that we have to deal with is that we have to deal with karma. Cause and effect relationships that we ourselves have instigated through our activity. If we have believed in self-nature as being inherently real since time out of mind, we have been selfish since time out of mind. We have thought only of ourselves since time out of mind. That's all we ever think of. That's all we're thinking of now. We're thinking about how we can do this thing so we can be better right now. Or how we don't like what she's saying because she's a pain in my neck because I don't like to think the way she does. It's too hard. We can be thinking like that. Whatever it is, I can guarantee you, it's about us. We have this deeply ingrained habitual tendency to think that we are somehow the center of the universe and that we are more important than others, that we should take care of ourselves, a survival kind of idea. And we really forget that other sentient beings are exactly equal to us. And the Buddha teaches us that other sentient beings, all sentient beings, are equal in that they each have within them the Buddha nature, the Buddha seed. Potentially, they are all Buddhas. Even little bugs, cockroaches, yuck, ants, beetles, non-physical beings, physical beings of all sorts. It's so funny how we think of these things. We think that we would very carefully avoid hitting a deer with our car because deers are so pretty and they have those big brown eyes. We don't mind heading straight for a cockroach. We don't mind stepping, we don't mind stepping on a bug or swatting a fly, a mosquito that's trying to bite us. But according to the Buddha, they are exactly equal. And the worst part, it's like the worst news we can possibly hear. That mosquito that we just squished because he was biting us is exactly equal to us. And we don't even think that, in our drunkenness and our forgetting that anything is important besides the belief in self-nature, besides survival, we don't even realize that we've been killing mosquitoes and all kinds of creatures and being unkind to others and taking our happiness as being more important than others since time out of mind. When according to the Buddha, each of us is exactly equal. And even in this room, I can clearly see with my own mind that there are many more of you than there are of me. Therefore, by weight and numbers, it must be that you are more important to me than I am. Must be. It doesn't make me a good-hearted kid. It doesn't make me a real star, outstanding in my own field. It makes me reasonable. That's reasonable, that your happiness would be more important than mine. So we have not practiced that way. We have practiced, however, this absorption in self. Absorption in self. How do I feel? How am I? How is my happiness? Always taking my pulse. Always thinking how I am. I'm so important. And that has happened since the first idea of self-nature. Survival, since survival became even possible, since there was a self to survive, that idea has happened. What have we done in all that time? We have not cared for others. We have not practiced compassion, really. Oh, a little bit, every now and then. You know, if you watch, you can see mother ducks leading baby ducks around, and you can see mothers holding their babies, and you can see even mother rats nursing baby rats. And you can see mother cockroaches laying baby cockroaches, and you can see that there's some kind of natural incidents of compassion in the world. But what else happens during that time? Well, you know, think about all the bugs that mother duck eats. Think about all the times that mother rats sometimes eat their children. Mother rats unconsciously cause disease and destruction that harm many other people. I don't know too much about mother cockroaches. I think they make other mothers crazy. Maybe that's karma. I don't know. But anyway, in the world, it's a pretty mixed bag of tricks, and I would say primarily we have been absorbed in self. So now when we begin on this path, if we think that suddenly we're going to be kind, because it's spiritual to be kind, you know, we are really deluding ourselves. We must understand that nobody other than the enlightened ones is truly born kind, really kind, understanding kindness and actually implementing it. Kindness meaning that we would risk our lives, that we would do anything, that we would live our lives solely to benefit sentient beings. That's kindness. Running to the store for a quart of milk for someone is not so much kindness. That we would transform our lives into a vehicle that will end suffering, not only in this lifetime, but in every future lifetime, returning again and again and again in order to benefit beings. That's kindness. Not helping old ladies cross streets. That's not so kind. If we think that somehow we can just make the decision and suddenly we will become kind, then we have not understood the teaching. We have not understood the path. We have not understood that there is a method, and that method is absolutely necessary because we are deeply involved in samsaric existence, because we have these deep and profound habitual tendencies. We were really not born in a position to make that decision completely without a good deal of work. We have to be sensible and reasonable and realize it's not going to come quickly or easily at first. That if you decide that you want to live a life of compassion, that decision is only one baby step. It's a good step, and I'm proud that you've made it. But it's one baby step. Now you have to practice compassion, and it won't feel natural at first. It's going to feel like a big pain in the neck. I mean big time. And, you know, some people come up to me and they'll say, well, I'm not really making very much headway in practicing this path. I'm not doing very well. And the reason why I'm not doing very well is that I can't seem to feel this compassion toward all sentient beings. I still think about myself. Well, la-di-da, join the human race, because guess what? Everybody else is too. At first, compassion isn't an emotion. It has nothing to do with that. You blame yourself because you feel that you're not that compassionate, that you're pretty self-absorbed. Well, actually, I think you're in better shape than the person that one's tripping through the sunlit fields claiming that they are thinking only of the benefit of beings. Because in fact, at least you have your feet on the ground, you're taking a step, you're starting, it's real, it's concrete. You begin to practice compassion in a very straightforward, logical way through discipline. Compassion starts with discipline. It does not start with a high feeling. It starts with discipline. and intention. That discipline begins to pacify the cause and effect relationships that we have naturally incurred by simply thinking of ourselves constantly and again and again and again. We begin to pacify that. And we begin to pacify the compulsion that is so part of our mind stream that our mind stream is like elastic, keeps stretching out and popping back, into the same habit. We begin to loosen that up, soften that up through the purity of our intention, through the purity of our discipline. And at first you will just grind your teeth, grit and gnash your teeth and think, yeah, I really would like to watch TV right now. I would like to put my feet up, but I have to go and build a blank stupa. It really will be like that at first. I mean, you'll hate yourself for that. You'll look yourself in the mirror and go, no! Let this thought go from my mind. But it's true, you will think like that. You will not feel like it. You'll think, I do not wish to do my practice now. I wish to sit down and listen to music. But instead, you will get up and do your practice. And eventually, you will get used to doing your practice, and it won't be such a terrible hardship, and you'll feel something begin to open up inside of you, like a wellspring of something, I don't know, relaxation, naturalness. And suddenly you begin to notice that you really, God, you spent some time actually thinking today about the fact that some people in the world will never have this opportunity. They've never even heard of the word enlightenment. They've never heard that there is an end to suffering. They've never heard that it's possible not to be poor. They've never heard that it's possible not to be hungry. There are people in the world who suffer unbelievably, and they have no method that will help them stop. And so it becomes something like a good idea to maybe practice and dedicate that practice to them so that they too will have the opportunity to practice. And you close your prayer by saying, you practice and your stupa making by saying, may all sentient beings have this marvelous opportunity to generate benefit toward others. And then you go, wow, that felt kind of good. Wow. And pretty soon something's starting to happen. Something's starting to happen. But at first it's really tough. And you should not be so hard on yourself. You should understand that no sentient being is naturally compassionate. We have to learn how to be compassionate. If you feel that you do have some real strong consideration for the welfare of others, if you feel compassionate, it's probably due to some practice that you've had in your past lives. That's true. So what do? Stay at that level? No, because you're not enlightened yet. You have to continue. You have to make that grow. To bring it forth. You have to nurture it as though it were a child in your womb. Eat well. Take care of yourself. Then give birth to that child. And take care of the child until it grows to something that is like a savior or savioress, that can bring benefit to others. Only when we achieve Buddhahood can we accomplish that, because while we can bring about some temporary relief for sentient beings suffering, the ultimate relief, the only real cessation of suffering, is enlightenment. And we can only facilitate others coming toward enlightenment by achieving some realization ourselves, by achieving that auspicious result. And the thing that will trip us up, is if we're not careful, is that we will focus on being kind. Like me, I'm going to be kind. See, I really want to be kind. It's really important to me that I be kind. I'm going to be kind, so I'll practice so that I can be kind. Then I'll be kind. You'll still be suffering, but I'll be kind. You see? And we'll get lost in that and we'll forget that the point is not to be kind. The point is that suffering should cease. If you think the point is for you to be kind, then you'll be satisfied with acting kind. And you'll never have to ask yourself why there is still suffering in the world. That should be your question. Why is there still suffering in the world? How can it end? And then suddenly it doesn't become about you anymore, you know? It becomes about the cessation of suffering. It becomes about sentient beings. And that's the point. That is the point. So you have to kind of bother yourself with that question that I hate, but I ask myself every day, why is that? Why am I here and there's still more suffering? What else can I do? How is it possible that I'm in a world where there's suffering after I've made that commitment? What's wrong with me? I better get busy. I better get my caboose in gear. And that's the kind of thing we have to ask ourselves constantly. It isn't about how you act. It isn't about whether or not you can get the feeling going. It's not about any of those things that really come more from self-absorption than they do from genuine compassion. It's about realizing that this is the condition of sentient beings. And that you, for one, wish to make the intention to change. You have made the intention to change. You will change, and ultimately you will be an instrument by which other sentient beings will experience change as well. Please do not delude yourself into thinking that that will pass quickly, that that will happen quickly. It will not happen quickly. It will happen with extraordinary work. The work begins in preliminary practice. If you think about the practice we're doing this afternoon, there are 5 different things, each of which we have to accomplish 100,000 times. Well, why can't you just, instead of saying something 100,000 times, why can't you just say it once with feeling? Now there you go again, trying to feel spiritual. Because we have committed the atrocities of hatred, greed, and ignorance, many more than 100,000 times. And like a flaccid muscle requires many repetitions of a certain exercise in order to become strong and pumped up, we have to engage in a program that will make us strong, build our muscle, so that we finally are able to awaken to the primordial wisdom nature. We have to overcome strong habitual tendency, strong compulsion, and strong karma, heavy karma. And the only way to do that is to begin immediately. There isn't much time. Even those of us that are young, there isn't much time. Those of us that are not young, there is even less time. So I hope that you will take this advice, and I hope that you will utilize it. It simply isn't enough to think that you're going to live a spiritual life. You must engage the method. The method must arise from the mind of enlightenment, which the Dharma does, and it must result in enlightenment, which is the only true cessation of suffering.